Language is constantly changing. When the American Dialect Society voted the term "ussy" as the word of the year in 2022, I think a lot of people realized we just kind of throw stuff onto other stuff to make words. Well, I decided to throw my arty schwussy into gear today by making this video on December 20th. Okay, long story short, major life event. Not like me getting pregnant, that's not exactly possible. I don't have a uterussy, but the only changes in language are not just slang. After all, you see this word here? What the hell's this from? Icelandic? No, it's actually from English! But there's a bunch of problems here. Like, this letter isn't in English, and I've never seen this word before, and you're stupid. Well, firstly, my mom said I'm smarter than you. And to explain the first two quickly, eth, the letter here, was removed from English when the printing press was invented. Thanks a lot, Johannes Gutenberg! But even then, this word had also fallen out of favor because, in the Middle Ages, the Normans took over the British Isles. Many words were brought into English, including Sothfast's French synonym, honest. French was commonly used in the British Isles alongside English, so many French words were brought in as more official or fancy terms, and therefore some English words naturally disappeared. But that's just the history of one word. Every word, and even grammatical structure, has its own beautiful history. Last video was all about how we can see a relation between languages and how they change compared to each other. So today, I want to look at why a language changes, mainly looking at English. But the problem here is, the reasons why language change is something I want to challenge. In linguistics, there's a generalized golden rule. That being, languages change for their speakers' needs. This essentially means that a language will add, drop, move, scramble, rearrange, or morph words based on what a speaker needs to make speech easier. It's a little vague, like everybody can learn how to pronounce a word or how a sentence in a foreign language is structured, but it's about ease of use. Did your society suddenly get a tool that makes carriages move on their own? Well, ask the guy who gave it to you what they call it. Now your language has the word motor. You needed that word to facilitate discussing it, so you changed your language to fit your needs. That's the easiest way to do it for most, but sometimes speakers just make their own words, or they may morph it, especially if the word they were given is hard to say for them. While this rule is a solid way to think about a lot of basic changes, and in the end it isn't wrong, I just wanted to talk about why I think a lot of language change doesn't fit this golden rule, and why it's too ambiguous to be helpful. Like, can you tell me why the word stone no longer means pillar, as its old form once meant pie, the language that English came from? This change is not really for the needs of an English speaker. We had to use the word pillar in its place. Also, related to what I just said, the phrase is vague and unhelpful. Science kind of thrives off of vague declarations, right? Like, there are 3 types of matter. But this golden rule concept isn't clear. Are needs related to the accidents like stone and pillar? I keep trying to find exactly what the so-called needs are, but it's not clear. Mark Davies has an article that talks about some things that we will discuss here, but he doesn't even mention the so-called needs of this golden rule. And also, why does nobody ever talk about the changes that aren't just new words themselves whenever this comes up? Like, look, here's a bite-sized article from the BBC, you know, like an important news group. And they literally just bring up words for the reasons on why languages change. And considering that neither of these articles bring up that golden rule, I think it's time to introduce a rule people can mention while actually understanding it. You see, I believe that instead of saying that languages change for their speakers' needs, they most commonly change due to, get this, accidents. The new golden rule is, languages generally change on accident. Yes, I'm saying that language change usually is not something that is a necessity, rather a bunch of mistakes which become the proper way of speaking. This is not to say mistakes are problems for a language. As a matter of fact, many incredible, important things to the world were made by mistake. Hey, why did I to clarify, mistakes are not problems. And this is not to say that every single linguist is wrong on language change. As a matter of fact, we will be looking at many different ways a language may change, as linguists have proven. But I just want to challenge the golden rule, and explain why these changes are usually accidents. This isn't to ignore a second category that is also important, but less so, fundamental world change, which actually causes languages to morph in a non-accidental way. We'll get to that after discussing the mistakes that change languages. With these 2 core concepts in mind, let's take a look at the ways a language can morph, and of course, the lack of reasons why languages change. To begin, I am using a few categories from the University of Pennsylvania on why languages change throughout my video. However, I am putting my own input into them, and I am using them specifically to discuss my points. Yes, I watched the H-Bomber guy vid, and yes, I am better than Illuminati in every way. I don't need a blink, I don't need water, I'm an ethereal being, I'm cool, I'm smart, I can do a 360, 1v1 me on Rust. Now, shockingly, in this field that's been around since the late 1700s, I am not the first person to talk about language change. As a matter of fact, this was kind of founded on language change. In the modern age, there are 2 main camps for why languages change. the structuralists, and the sociolinguists. The first is what we'll discuss in this section, but I think it's worth noting that both seem to be right to different extents. But it's stated as if these groups are mutually exclusive, when Davies also points out the fact that these two ideas very clearly seem to work together. Why are there staunch groupings when both answers can clearly be correct to some extent? I don't get science. The structuralists believe that language changes due to internally motivated changes, which I am interpreting as the so-called accidental changes. So what's a good, simple way to discuss the concept of accidental change first? Well, clearly, it's when a language is divorced from its older generation. Languages are in a constant state of evolution. Think about it this way. There are almost no people from the 1800s alive today. I mention this because this means that the way we speak English was passed down to us by the people we speak to. And this means that the entire language was essentially poured into a new generation like water from bucket to bucket. The oldest speakers are gone, and the new speakers have to fill in deficits by adapting their grammar and changing their words. I bring up this situation because this is an integral component of this section, and is important to understanding accidents. Everyone ends up misconceiving something slightly about a word they were taught. There's no source listed for this, because you just need to ask yourself this question. When was the last time you misspoke or misremembered the definition of a word? Have you ever misspelt the word finish as finish?
I wrote that word as F-I-N-N-I-S-H.
Like the
which
people.
It's describing culture or things or people from Finland.
This creates a lot of opportunities for change in a language. So, first, let's discuss the loss of definitions. Almost nobody completely correctly knows their own language, so sometimes words just don't make the cut, and sometimes meanings don't make the cut. Take for example the word stone. Once upon a time it meant pillar, but if we think about this a bit, it seems that stone could have meant both pillar and stone. But the definition of pillar was simply lost. As a matter of fact, the word decadence is a great way to discuss this change. As a Spanish speaker, en un sentido, I kept seeing the word decadencia in many places, but I had no clue why the word decadence was there. Decadence meaning indulging in pleasures to my eye, and I feel that many English speakers would agree with me here. But this is the thing, while that meaning is also in Spanish, the much more common meaning, which is basically gone in the English lexicon, is its use as a meaning of decline. Take for example, la decadencia de Yugoslavia. This word, being seldom used for its other definition, eventually became known to the new generation of speakers only as indulging in pleasures, and therefore changed completely on accident through the process of language learning. Of course, the reason these changes happened are essentially accidental in my view. Little changes, such as losing definitions, are inevitable in the passing down of a language. If you can't know everything, the little things that a lot of people forget will be cemented. And for what it's worth, over the huge course of human history, little changes like this amounted so much that Spanish and English are now different languages, which is incredibly interesting to think about. Words are quite flexible and can be used in various situations where they may not be expected. But due to the inherent flexibility of language, sometimes people fail to understand the meaning of a word, and then it becomes cemented with this wrong definition. It's worth noting that it isn't inherently bad for a word to change, as I've been mentioning. As a matter of fact, bad has its origins in being a word used to refer to hermaphrodites? Like this, as a natural process of language change, literally happens all the time. Literally. No, I mean literally. Like literally as in, oh yeah! Literally as a term is the exact opposite of what it should be. Literal's old definition clearly referred to metaphorical reasonings, like in literature. However, due to its modern usage, it's now become the opposite of its old meaning. We can even see this today in something like I could care less, where the original phrase I couldn't care less was quite obvious. The speaker does not care in the slightest, where this modern version is technically wrong. Of course, I'd more or less argue that it works like a threat, like this matters to me very slightly, but if you don't shut up, it won't matter to me at all. But of course, that's my interpretation. But what's even crazier is the accursed initialism of POV. POV's existence as a phrase was very clearly invented to discuss a view from a specific person's perspective. After all, it means point of view. Take for example, POV, you are looking at yourself in a mirror. However, for some reason, the word has completely divorced itself from this meaning on many types of social media. This use is the just plain wrong part of the story, where people mistakenly use one word and think of it as another. The weird part is, if this change stays, it is the definition. POV doesn't just have to mean a first-person POV anymore, but rather may be used as a third-person POV. The misuse of words is a total accident caused by mistakenly assuming the definition of a word, and the definition then becomes the main definition. Sounds are hard. You see the word fifth? Yeah, I'm not going to try to pronounce that second F, alright? Well, I wanted to figure this out. If it's hard, then why do we say it in the first place? What accidents cause it to change? Well, I believe that the main reason these words change is the problem of the critical period. There's a certain age where you acquire important aspects of a language, such as grammar and pronouns. This critical period is necessary for acquiring the fundamental aspects of human language, and, in my mind, may be the cause of the slow change of sounds. Aspects like the majority principle and the most natural development principle are some well-known ways that sound changes in a language. And remember, these are only a few types of changes among many others. This means that the way words may change is due to slight changes in things like whether or not the vocal cords vibrate for sound, for example, and whether or not a new vowel will remain or disappear. I think that these sound changes may change due to a buildup of mistakes over time. If we slowly start to accept one sound, that sound will slowly morph into a new one with slight degradation continuing over the years. Take for example the word nuclear. Some people find that really hard to say, so they say nuclear. That new U sound is introduced simply to make it easier to say, and therefore becomes the standard. And next on the list, of course, is the Great Vowel Shift. The Great Vowel Shift is a complex topic that is better explained by somebody who's well versed with it, but here's the thing, nobody knows why it happened. We've looked at it from many angles, but nobody really knows exactly why the vowels shifted in the English language. In short, the Great Vowel Shift was a big shift of many vowels in the English language, which I've discussed in this video, but I also recommend this video on it. But for theories on why this did happen, this leads us to the aspect of fundamental world change. While I very clearly advocated the fact that many accidents are the reasons why things change, fundamental world change is also an important concept. This is for the second camp of people who theorize on language change, the sociolinguists. They believe in externally motivated change, and they focus on social motivations for changes. To me, this also encompasses the concept of huge world events, or at least huge to a group of speakers. With the Great Vowel Shift still in mind, we must talk about one of the reasons why it may have happened for a clear, defined reason: language contact. Language contact is the interaction of two languages closely, and is a fundamental aspect of English history. As I've discussed before, the French language, or Norman really, has impressed itself upon English through history. When the Normans won the, I didn't write this down in my script, war, the Norman language became the official language of the government, and that language leaked into the lower classes. Watch my previous video on this for a bit more information, or read a book, that'd probably be more helpful. Either way, English now has many French terms. As a matter of fact, it makes up nearly 30% of the language. It's not just fancy words like hors d'oeuvres. But this isn't the only aspect of language contact. As a matter of fact, the plague morphed England and may have changed the language a lot too. When the plague was running its course, many people were forced into the south of the British Isles, and their languages interacted a fair bit. This rapid course of language contact may have contributed to the Great Vowel Shift, due to new sounds becoming common and less common sounds falling out of use. We no longer have the sound of х, for example, which isn't in French either. And our vowels, of course, heavily shifted. While I could argue that these changes are still essentially accidents to some extent, like the plague was not planned, but this is a clear reason. The world had changed, new words had been introduced, and sometimes they outright replaced words, like good old so fast. Not to mention that for a speaker born in this environment, they might not be good at pronouncing a different sound that is uncommon in different languages that they hear. Of course, that's just my theory on it. It's worth noting that languages may both change diachronically or synchronically, essentially over time or at the same time. That being that there's different dialects. The concept of social differentiation fits both of these. For example, many slang words, words in the informal register, may quickly die or become just a standard word. For the first example, I haven't heard anybody ever say fucking chinwag, a word that was apparently real and used in the Victorian ages. On the other hand, okay is almost in every single fucking language ever. You've probably heard the origin 20 times now, but for those who don't know, all correct was a purposeful misspelling used as an acronym, because people in the ages of Martin Van Buren thought that was entertaining. This term caught on, and became ubiquitous in many languages as a quick answer of understanding or just an emphatic particle to clarify things. The reason that these terms existed and exist is just that, showing yourself off as a member of a group. As a matter of fact, whole-ass languages have developed off of this. Did you know that in the 1950s, thousands of gay men in the UK used a language called fucking Polari to speak to each other? This was real? I don't want to spoil much about its existence because there's a really good book by Paul Baker on this. Go read Fabulosa, I beg of you. Either way, it's clear that differentiating yourself from people is part of identity. Like, speak to a gay person. What does boy moding mean? What is a titty skittle? Despite their actual meaning, it's clear that these are markers of a community, as many people may have no clue what these are, and they serve to keep a group of people as more or less an exclusive club. This language change is clearly deliberate then. It's to show that you're part of a group of people.
We've got one hope, which is anti-Semitism. What?
Words hurt. I say this because some people don't really realize how psychologically important words are, especially in the context of world change and things like xenophobia. Different ways of talking about people are some of the easiest changes to see in the world. Take for example the Civil Rights Movement and the history of Black Americans. For a long time, the way people formally referred to black people in America was as, JFK, help me out here.
Negro.
Thanks. This is kind of crazy, because even MLK motherfucking Jr. was saying this, and everyone was like, yeah man, that's right, that's fine, that's cool. But this came to a close with the Civil Rights Movement achieving their goals of ending legal segregation. This term very quickly became awful after that, though. In 1967, Stokely Carmichael, a civil rights activist, argued that this term was ultimately pejorative. Very quickly over time, Black Americans started to prefer the term black to describe themselves, and the former term became totally uncouth by the mid-1980s. I used a quote here because uncouth is the best word I've ever seen. Read the Jim Crow Museum article on this, by the way. These purposeful changes are made to foster goodness in my mind. Like, it's not cool to be a bastard or to call yourself negative terms, so we actively attempt to change that. But what's super interesting to me, Black Americans commonly use the term colored, popular today, to describe themselves. Strangely enough, many Black Americans saw this term as pejorative, namely Web du Bois. Of course, the term that was used in the Civil Rights Movement by Black Americans was used in a positive sense. It was for cultural reasons. Changes like this are constant, and I could argue that they still stem from accidents. Of course, this is not to say this word has no negative sentiment, because it certainly does. But the negative association of another term, Oriental, may have stemmed from a perceived threat of it being used negatively. You know how I shirked at saying that previous term? Well, Oriental is actually in a very strange spot, as evidenced by this funny Swedish guy ranting about, sauces?
Oh, there you go. There you go. Oriental dressing. I don't know. Maybe I should shut the fuck up if it's not as racist as I think it is. But I think like Oriental is like a very dated word, right?
And many Asian Americans, itself a debated term, advocate for its use, such as Jane Tsuchiyama. Oddly enough, other Asian Americans are against it, and believe it's dated due to its association with exoticism, as journalist Jeff Young once stated.
Well, I think history really does play a huge role in this. And when you think about it, the term Oriental itself kind of feels freighted with luggage. It's a term which you can't think of without having that sort of smell of incense and the sound of a gong kind of come up in your head.
These two differing opinions show that there is a clear debate here, and also that the perceived threat can develop into an actual one, where this term has a bad air associated with it for some, and is a proudly used term for others. This is all to say, the world changes, and we change with it. Sometimes words become bad, and sometimes we have to make other changes, as previously discussed. Languages change for social reasons, for sure, but not all the time. In conclusion, I think that the way we define language change's golden rule is too ambiguous to be helpful, and denoting how languages morph through accidents and changes in our world is a lot more helpful. But also that many changes truly are accidents might help us to understand languages better. With that said, if you disagree with me, tell me why my line of thinking isn't perfect. Remember, this is the opinion of an undergrad, I'm not a PhD holder, yet. And these theories were developed over about 2 weeks for the sake of this video. While I have thought this through enough to believe what I'm saying, there's a good chance that there are some holes in my argument. And, as a matter of fact, I most certainly didn't talk about everything that I wanted to. There's just so much to language change that this video would be an extra half hour long if I included a lot of the other interesting parts. But that's my view. Accidents are the fundamental basis of language change. Language is just too complex to learn perfectly, and that will lead to new words, morphing grammar, and every other little change you can think of that isn't caused by social changes in the world. And on the other hand, the way the world changes is important, but it isn't everything. And before I go, I have a few things to say. For one, thank you. I know I was on hiatus for a literal, actual year, but I'm not going to stop posting of my own free will anytime soon. I hope this return to form was enjoyable. I did have some ideas that I wanted to develop more, such as discussing how some words become negative due to perceived threats, but those were a footnote due to lack of time, and also because I'd rather not wantonly claim things when it comes to social issues. I'm not very well versed in things like the Civil Rights Movement, and I don't want to step on any toes by guessing around. But hey, if you really like my content, please check out my second channel. I have a video that will come out soon over there, around New Year's Day. I had some other ideas, but due to recent events, I am making something else. But if you want something right now, this video that I've already made is hilariously deranged and funny. And, for what it's worth, I have a huge project planned this year that should come out in either March or April, so get ready for that. Anyways, once again, I'd like to thank you for watching my return to form. It means a lot to be able to come back after my involuntary hiatus. Artie Schwa is out now. I can't actually leave, I'm just off screen. Well, like, I exist until the video is over, right? I'm getting philosophical. Like, if I'm not on screen, is it a Schrodinger's box deal? Is this like the ship of Theseus where